This presentation will discuss designing your classroom based on a learner-centered teaching approach. The main idea I want you to take away from this presentation is that we are not teachers. We are coaches and facilitators. Through this presentation, I will explain learner-centered teaching and how we can become more like coaches to enhance students' learning. I will present the challenges associated with learner-centered teaching and try to give you a visualization on how you can implement a learner-centered teaching environment in your classroom and have students become more successful. I want to make one thing clear before I begin. In this presentation, I will refer to as a teacher as a coach, because the meaning of teacher in my eyes relates to old traditional ways in the classroom. We are headed in a new direction, and we do not need teachers anymore. We now need facilitators and coaches. The person who does the work receives the learning, according to Terry Doyle in his book Learner-Centered Teaching. In traditional teacher-centered environments, the focus is more on the teacher. The teacher will stand up at the blackboard and lecture for a majority of the class. Then students may do some activity to test if they retained any knowledge from the lecture and the notes that they had taken. In a learner-centered teaching environment, it is the exact opposite. The students do the work and learn from it. The teacher is their facilitator, or as I will refer to as their coach. The coach's job is to help the students understand the material more in depth and help the students who may not understand the material. The coaches gives examples and provides students with activities to revisit the ideas learned earlier. You may be wondering why we are wanting to make a switch after so many years of teaching the same way. Well, there was a book published in 2011 called Academically Adrift. In this book, the authors found that after 2 years of college, only 45% of students retained the information that they had learned. And after 4 years of college, 36% of students retained the information that they had learned. These, these numbers are high. Um, these high numbers of students not being able to retain information tells us that it is time for a change. In the next slide, we will go a little more in depth and talk about how a flipped classroom is successful in a learner-centered teaching environment. Flipping the classroom is an example of learner-centered teaching environment. In a flipped classroom, the students go home and learn the material that was traditionally learned inside the classroom. Khan Academy has a big name associated with this right now. For example, we are teaching a math course. The student will go home and watch an online video through Khan Academy about the order of operations. This video will explain the order in which to use each operation. The next day, the students will come in and practice what they have learned. The teacher or coach is there to help guide them along as they work. If the coach sees any struggles from any students, then it is their job to step in and provide extra help. This method is effective because the videos engage the students. It also helps the coaches as well because they can identify areas that they need to focus on where students struggle. Now that we have identified what a learner-centered teaching environment is, we must create a plan to get there. The first and most important part of this is that we have to change from teachers to coaches. And learner-centered teaching environment is about students, not about the teacher. Just like a basketball team is about the players, not about the coach. It is the players and students who put in the work, and they are the ones who are rewarded for their hard work. If you have ever played sports or watched them, then you know that most players execute the right plays to win the game, and the coaches cannot play the game for them. The coach's job is to prepare the students for the game and make the right play calls to put their team in the best situation to win the game. That is how we have to look at education. We want to give our students the tools and knowledge to succeed, but it is ultimately up to them if they want to succeed or not. If we can successfully change to a coaching role, then the students will have more responsibility to do their work. If they do their work, then they will learn because as coaches, we have confidence that we are doing the right things and putting the students in the best situations for them to succeed. There are many objections to a learner-centered teaching environments from students, colleagues, and administrators. It is our job to set up a plan on how we will run our classroom. This will be a long process and will not show success overnight, but we must be persistent in what we are doing and never look back. To move to a learner-centered teaching environment, first we must think about short-term goals or daily objectives. One of my favorite coaches was my freshman basketball coach, and he always said, "Keep getting better each day, and let's focus on one game at a time." We can't focus on the big picture right away, or it might scare the students away. As coaches, we must define what is expected each day. The long term goal of any team is to win a championship, and short term goals lead to that long term success. For our students, we have to define what is the most important parts of our course that we want our students to learn and retain. These key concepts and terms should be stressed over and over throughout the course. Another important part of a coach's job is to make adjustments. Sometimes players get hurt, or you might have to adjust to the other team's defense. In education, we need to look at our progress and decide, are we heading in the right direction? If not, do we need to what do we need to do differently and how do we do it? Since learner-centered teaching is a new concept, we might have to make adjustments in our first couple years of teaching in the style, but that is a part of the process. The last important part of the coach's job is feedback. If a student makes a bad play or does something wrong, then we need to try to fix the problem in practice so it doesn't happen in the games. The same concept exists in education. We want to help students correct their errors in the classroom so that they will not make these mistakes in the workforce and they will be better prepared for what comes next. Over the summer, I took an education course from Phoenix University. One of the main topics we discussed was meeting the needs of students. All students have different needs and we must identify these, but it is important for many reasons. First off, if we do not build a relationship with our students, they will not trust us. I mentioned on becoming a coach rather than a teacher. Some of my favorite coaches still stay in contact with me. We build a relationship that will last a lifetime, and I look up to them. If our students do not trust us, then we have no chance of switching to a learner-centered teaching environment. If we show our students that we care about them as individuals and we care if they succeed or not, then they will begin to care more about themselves and their individual education as well. This also helps to cut down on classroom misbehaviors. If a student if students have a teacher that they respect, then they will behave better. For example, the average person would not try to hurt their parents. In fact, they would do anything to avoid hurting their parents. That is because they know their parents really care about them. It is important we establish a relationship similar to a mother or father, but we have to be careful as well. With lawsuits and all these scandals that you hear about on the news, we must identify a threshold on what is sufficient to be successful in the relationship and what is exceeding the boundaries of a teacher and student relationship. Once we have established a strong relationship with students, we can move on to the next step. As I mentioned before, this is a process, so students still might try to resist the change as we move on. Students have learned in a linear pattern their whole life, so they have a fixed mindset. This means that they believe that the way they have learned works, and why should we change it? This also means that they believe if they are not good at one subject, then they will have no room for improvement, and that they will always be bad at this subject. As coaches, we need to develop a growth mindset for our students. When we switch to a learner-centered classroom, we can help achieve this. Through flipping the classroom, we can identify areas in which students may be weak. This extra time that we have in class can be devoted to help students master the concepts that they were once weak at. With the idea of having a strong relationship with our students that will be more likely to listen to our instructions on how we can improve, this will help develop a growth mindset. Another way that you will have a solid game plan is to share responsibility. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, a strong teacher and student relationship is very important for a learner-centered teaching environment to be successful. In Terry Doyle's book, Learner-Centered Teaching, he talks about sharing the power with the students. We cannot share power with students if we do not have a mutual trust with each other. Sharing power is effective because it gives the students options and does not limit the students. An example of shared power in the classroom would be letting the students to help make rules and guidelines of the class. If the students are a part of this process and do not uphold these standards and guidelines, then they will have no excuse for the consequences. If students help form guidelines and procedures, they have a clear understanding of the rules and should have a clear understanding of expectations as well. As a coach, you should have a pretty good idea of the direction or game plan that you want to take your class, but you should be open to ideas as well. Creativity is huge in learning. I've found through prior experiences the more creative students are, the more that they learn. Another topic to discuss is assigning due dates for assignments. Most classes have assignments and tests set up for around the same dates because there is only a certain amount of time to teach all the material. We can give students more freedom to decide when the assignments should be due to be more flexible with the students. If we think of this from our standpoint, it is a win-win situation for the teachers. Students also have more time to prepare because they are not stressed out from doing your project and studying for three other tests. In return, we get to see the students' best work. If the students have sufficient enough time to prepare and are not stressed out with other things on their agenda, then their quality of work should improve as well. Thinking about this issue, we should give students freedoms, but we must also remember that we are the checks and balances. We must maintain stability in the classroom and not give up too much power to the students. Another important tool is facilitation without speaking. I know some of the best coaches I had in sports did a great job of this. Sometimes my coach would take a time out to discuss what we were doing wrong or what we needed to do better. Other times he would simply just let us continue to play and figure out our own mistakes. We need to take this mindset into the classroom. Since the ones who do the work receive the learning, it is important we let our students figure out things on their own sometimes, but other times it is appropriate that we provide further input to our students' learning. Dr. Bright of Wright State University did a great job of this in his management class that I took from him. He would sit there as students would ask questions to each other, and then each student would come up with creative ideas on how to answer this, and new students would continue to build upon these ideas in order to reach the desired objective. In the previous slide, I mentioned learning without speaking from us coaches. To become a great coach, we must identify when it is appropriate time to speak up and when it is appropriate time to be quiet. If we are having a group discussion, then we must identify a time when we feel that students have received the right amount of knowledge. Have they learned the objectives that we set out beforehand? If so, then now is the time to speak up and ask questions to make our students think. We believe that have learned we believe that we have learned something, but we need to show them that they have learned something from us. We can ask questions to help generate new thoughts and ideas. We can propose what if scenarios. Would this change our students' opinion? Learning takes place from a whole lot of different viewpoints, and we know this because not every student is the same, but it is our job to make sure that every student learns the material, not just a few students. A coach of a basketball team wants their players to know where to be at the right time in a certain play, so they practice scenarios that are game-like situations. As a coach in the classroom, authentic learning becomes a way for us to practice real-life scenarios to ensure that students succeed in the real world. Authentic learning is relating the material we teach in our classrooms to real-world experiences. I'm sure that you all have had a student ask you this before: how will this help me? How will this help me after I finish the course? This is where we show students why it is important to know the material and retain the information for later use. As a high school business teacher, it is important for my students to know about debits and credits, so I give them an assignment where they're the owners of an amusement park and they have to make upgrades to the park. Their objective is to record the transactions and make sure their checkbook balances. I want students to understand the differences between assets, liabilities, and equity, but I also want students to know how to use them in a real world situation. I also tell students if they think of being a business owner themselves, it is important to know and understand this. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, there's a big problem with students not retaining information. Repetition is huge if we want our students to retain our information. If we go back to the example of teachers becoming coaches, we can analyze this at a deeper level. Coaches spend practice running the same plays over and over. There's a reason why they do this, and that is because they want their players to have perfection on this play. We know that no one is perfect and mistakes will occur, but if we continually practice the same thing over and over again, it will become a habit. A very wise person by the name of Albert Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If we do the same thing over and over again, it becomes a habit. If you think back to learning to drive a car, at first it may have been hard and you may have made mistakes. But now we drive to work every day while talking on our cell phones, not even really aware that we are actually driving a motorized vehicle. Once we do something so many times, our brain can perform this action without having much thought on how we do it. If we think back to our plans or objectives that we want to reach with our students, then we should put into consideration when we design our courses. Having chapter tests, unit tests, semester tests, and cumulative finals will test very important information that we want students to retain. They may make mistakes throughout the quarter, but once they have completed the course, they will have full knowledge and understand the content described in your objectives. As in before any big game, coaches want their players to get enough sleep. Sleep is important for students as well. Our body stores a lot of information as we sleep, so if we do not get enough sleep, then we are not storing information correctly. Imagine you are in a data analysis position in a company. You work on collecting data and organizing data into charts and other useful information that is important for your company. At the end of the day, you forget to save your documents on your computer. There's a chance your computer has auto-saved it somewhere on your computer, but you do not know the file location, so it may be hard for you to recall this information tomorrow when you get back in the office. The brain works in a similar way. Students work all day trying to learn new information. The information is organized in a systematic pattern. It relates to former experiences, former knowledge, and builds upon previous knowledge. Students may hear information and they think they understand it. The important part is understanding the information and being able to recall it. We need to explain the importance of sleep. If we tell this to our students, they may give us a bad look or not understand why. The sleep aspect ties into the repetition part of learning. If students can begin to store small chunks of information and we can reiterate that ever so often, it will become more likely to stick with the students. Many students Many studies have been done to help support the relationship between sleep and long-term memory, and the evidence shows a strong correlation between sleep and retaining information. This might seem like a small factor when we look at the big picture, but I've always been taught if you want to be the best and you want to be successful, then you never take the little things for granted. Perfection is not impossible, but perfection is impossible, but striving to be perfect is not. And that is why I want to point out the little things to the students. I want them to put forth their best effort and do the little things. I know that if they do what is asked of them, then they will learn and retain information. If they learn and retain information, that we as teachers should feel accomplished because we are doing our job, and that is a reward in itself. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, there are many challenges that await us when switching to a learner-centered teaching environment. This presentation has given you the keys to succeed inside the classroom. If we establish a positive relationship with our students, taking a coaching role in the classroom, and adhere to other tips that I have given you, then learner-centered teaching environment will be a big success. What does this success give us? For students, it means they will enjoy learning a lot more and they will receive better grades. They will also be able to learn the information from our course and retain the information learned to use in courses past our level. As coaches, what does this mean for us? If everything has went to plan, then we have helped support the statistics of why a learner-centered teaching environment is so important. If we have taught one successful learner-centered teaching course, we should not be happy, but we should be content. As I mentioned earlier, it is a continuing process, and we must continue to improve year after year. I want to provide you with some tips moving forward. We should keep a teaching portfolio and document information as we move through the course to help support our evidence. We should discuss among colleagues and administrators what is going well and how we can improve the process. Finally, we should provide training for younger teachers who are not familiar with this. Continuity and consistency will be a big thing moving forward. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope this presentation has helped you become a coach instead of a teacher. I know if you can become a coach, then you can establish a great learner centered teaching environment.